my name is H.A. Pruitt, and I'm the author of the Anathalian series, and I'm also an editor, and in this video I'm going to talk about an editing tip. A lot of tips kind of in one subject. I'm going to talk about descriptions, writing descriptions, why you should use descriptions, tips of how to create a better visual for yourself so you can create a stronger image for your readers, and what to include in a description to strengthen it, or how to write one. So that's what I'm going to talk about, but before I do that, really quick, I'm an editor, so if you need an editor and you think I'd be a good fit, or you just have questions to see if I would be a good fit for your manuscript, please do comment below or go to my website and send me an email. I'll put my website contact page link below in the description so you can find that and send me a message if you want. So, why write descriptions? That's the first thing. Some authors I've heard say that descriptions slow down the pace and don't allow the reader to imagine. If you give them everything, they don't get to imagine what they think. And when I'm talking about descriptions, I mean describing places, describing people, describing action, descriptions in general but usually we talk about descriptions when it's describing like a place or a person. The action's a little different, but that's still, these tips can include that too. So, but even though some people say that, descriptions help readers feel more immersed in the book. Good descriptions make it feel less like a book and more like an experience. If you've ever read a book with good descriptions, you're just going to get into it better. You're going to see it better. The picture's going to be more full for you. And good descriptions don't likely give every single detail, but give enough that the reader can have an understanding to build on. We'll talk a little bit more about that, how to not give too much, but to give enough later. But just I've heard this. Some people say don't do descriptions because they're just, nobody wants to read them and they slow down the pace. But I've read books that do that and they are heavy on the action but low on the description of the world and the people. And it's kind of like reading in black and white and everything's kind of vague and misty and I can't really see much going on, and I'm a really visual person. I could make it up for myself, and I did have to make it up for myself, but still, if you don't do it for your readers, at least partially, then your readers aren't going to feel like they know the scenery and the setting. They're going to feel like things are more vague. So it is important to include descriptions in your manuscript, in your writing. So tips of how to create a better visual for yourself so you can create a stronger image for your readers. I'm having trouble speaking right now and I don't know why. But these are the tips so you can make it more clear for yourself what you're trying to do. Because sometimes as writers, when we go to describe something, we're like, wait, what does it even look like? I don't know what it looks like. And it's so important for you first to know exactly every single detail. You, the author, want to know exactly what it looks like whenever you're writing it so you can help your reader understand what it looks like. If it's not clear to you, it's going to come through in the writing and your reader's not going to be sure what it looks like. So how do you do that? You can draw it. I'm artistic. I can stop. I can draw my margin. I'm like, okay, this is what it looks like, and then I can describe it. You can diagram it, because not everybody can draw well enough to do that, but you can diagram it. If it's like a setting, you can say, okay, get my graph paper and draw my square here, and you can label it, you know, the house is over here, and then draw a little square here, this is where the person's going to stand, so you can get like spacing. I'm doing it on my paper. My paper's not graph paper, but I hope you get the idea of what I'm saying. Sit down, and even if you're not a good drawer, you can trace the lines of graph paper, or you can get little like cups and trace around the circle for something circular, or make like an X for a person. This is where my people are going to stand. So you can get spacing, because sometimes when you describe a space in your book, a setting, it can be really hard to keep consistent with your visual and remember that your character's over here and the building's over here, and not talk about them being here and close to it, but then being far from it and things like that. So you can diagram it, and not be like a artistic drawing, but be a very informational drawing. You can let someone who can draw read it and see what they come up with. So whenever I'm editing for a client and a description comes up and I'm not sure if it's what they wanted the reader to get, I'll draw a picture in the margin and I'll say, this is what your description leads me to see. And I'll try to do it just you know, like they do that little challenge of have somebody make a peanut butter sandwich by giving them the instructions. I try to not make anything up, not try to infer anything. I just take the instructions or the description as they give it to me and put it on the paper. And I'll say, you know, is this what you wanted? If it is, you achieved what you wanted. If it's not, you know, change this up, and I give suggestions accordingly. But it really helps to have someone read it and understand what a reader is going to perceive whenever they hear it. Because when you, like, I visualize really well. And so when I write something, it's so clear in my head that I don't necessarily have to draw. I do sometimes because it's fun and I love to, but I don't necessarily have to draw. It's just like so clear in my head. Like I've seen the picture and it sticks there. But if you're not like that and you're like, okay, I think this is kind of what it looks like, and then you write it down, it would really help to know if what you thought you wrote is what someone will get whenever they read it. So I hope that makes sense. Have someone who can draw for you after they read it. And don't like tell them this is what it's supposed to look like. Let them just read it and draw it. That will help a lot to know what you need to change from that point. Okay. Another tip to help you visualize it better is to set up a stage. Kind of like the diagram thing, but like, you know, get your cat and get your cup and, you know, set up the different things in your area, your house, or on your table or whatever. Say, okay, this is what it looks like. So you can get spacing and you can get just a good visual of height differences, you know, find little objects for little things, big objects for big things. You can use boxes, whatever. But just help yourself and then take a picture of it. So you can be like, okay, this is what it looks like. Also, you can act it out. If you're describing an action scene, then you can act it out. You can find pictures. A lot of people love Pinterest. As an artist, I'm not really keen on using any images that I have not drawn to show what I want. But if you're just using it for your reference, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So you can find pictures to help you visualize what something looks like. Sometimes you need multiple pictures. Like when I'm trying to draw one character, sometimes I'm like, okay, because even though I can draw well and visualize well, it still helps to have something to look at. I drew a hand the other day and I held my hand like this for like 40 minutes so I could make sure I got the details right. And sometimes you have to find multiple pictures. You know, if you want a guy with black hair and blue eyes and a certain nose, and you have to find each one of those pictures somewhere different, and you can put it all together. So find pictures. My last tip for helping yourself visualize it is pretend like you are walking through the scene and include everything as you see it. You don't have to keep everything, but to help yourself understand what everything looks like, pretend you're walking through this scene or encountering this person and just describe every little thing as you come to it. Okay, so that was a lot of tips. I hope that some of those or all of those or one of those at least help you create a better visual for yourself. The baby is shaking the camera. He's a toddler now. That's why he's madness and chaos and shaking the camera. The toddler is shaking the camera. Okay, he stopped. All right, so what to include whenever you are writing in a description and how to write a description. These are next. Okay, so my first tip of how to write a description. Think about what would my character notice and what is important. Like I said earlier, you're probably not going to include every single detail, like with characters. This is the easiest example with characters. When one character meets another, they're probably not going to think, okay, their ears are this shape and their face is this shape and their eyes are this shape and their eyes are this color and their eyelashes are long, short. They're not going to think all that. Just like when you meet a person, think about what would you notice first. Usually hair color and style, eye color, you know, facial expression. That's what people notice. So think about what would your character notice. Maybe they are super analytical and analyze everything. Or maybe they don't really pay attention to visual stuff. My husband, like after we meet someone, he'll be like, I remember what they said. But I'll be like, they were wearing this and their hair color was this and their style was this and da da da. I don't know what they said, but I remember all these details about them. And he's like, how do you do that? How do you even remember that? How do you care about that? I'm like, I just do. And so think about what your character is like, what they would remember. Would they not remember at all what they look like? Just a general, they were nice looking or they were not nice looking. And remember what they said. Think about what would your character notice and describe that. And then think about what's important for your readers to know and what's important for your character to know. The setting or the character that they encounter. What are the readers going to need to know? Do they need to know there's a rope hanging off the side of the building because that's going to come into play later? Do they need to know that The buildings are circular, so that when the characters run through the streets, they know that they're running like this and not running like this. Think about what's important. It's hard to give an example when I don't have a specific example in my head, but hopefully you have an example in your head now from your story. Okay, so my next tip of how to write a description. Include it as the description details come into play. Okay, as your characters notice, you can break up the details. So, I just read what I wrote, but this is me explaining it. So think about when your character is like walking through a town. They may not like see the full bird's eye view of it and explore the whole town, and you write this whole big long paragraph page description of every single part of the town and everything they're going to encounter. Think about what are they seeing as they walk up. Sometimes you will do that if you have like a narrator voice, but think about if it's from your character's deep point of view, then maybe they see the first buildings. Maybe they see a couple people in the streets, and you start describing one thing after another. And you start describing a couple things, and then have some dialogue, them talking. Then as they go through the streets, you include more description as they encounter more. Try to make it so like it's from your character's perspective. Again, if you had a narrator's perspective, then maybe you could get away with, okay, this is like the bird's eye view, this is the whole description, this is what's going on, and then let your characters proceed to what they're doing. A lot of this depends on how you're writing, but if you're writing third person or first person, people usually don't use second person, but you could. If you're writing first, second, or third person, then you want to try to include descriptions as they come instead of just like putting it all out there all at once. Okay. And then my next, okay, I got a couple more on the back of my page. Next, how to think about all 5 senses. You may not use all 5 senses, but think through it. That one's pretty self-explanatory. If you can get scent in there, people have really strong scent memories. And so if you can tie your scene to a scent, like smell, then that will create a strong image for someone. Like if you talk about it smelled like my mom baking chocolate chip cookies, like instantly people are going to be like, the best smell ever, because people love their mom's chocolate chip cookies. I know in my first book, Anathalion, I talk about the smell of the wood, and I mean that just instantly, I can smell wood. It's such just the memory of scent is just so strong, and people connect with that, and they're like, I get it, I'm there, I'm so there. So if you can include scent, that's good. But usually it's just going to be like sight and sound. But if you can include the others, the stronger the image will be. Okay, next tip of how to write a description. Try to incorporate action into the descriptions, or in other words, try to use active verbs instead of passive verbs. Always a good tip for everything you do. Use active verbs instead of passive verbs. An example would be, we often revert to passive verbs whenever we do descriptions. We're like, his hair was black, his eyes were blue. And like, how else do you say that? You know, like if his eyes are black, how else do I say his eyes are black without using are or is or was? How do I do that? Use action. Have your character do something. So my example to do it a different way would be, he swung his black hair out of his eyes and his blue eyes met mine. Didn't use any passive verbs, and you created a more full picture, more full description, and you told about what the guy looked like. And so when you do it like that, it creates so much better of a visual, and it's so much better. And then my second to last tip of how to write a description. Don't feel like you have to include everything, but don't be afraid to. So this goes back to what I talked about before. Okay, don't feel like you have to include everything, especially for familiar things like people or animals or things you've already described. So if you're describing a person or a character and they are a human from Earth, don't feel like you have to describe what a human from Earth looks like, because readers are going to know what a human from Earth looks like. Give them enough so they understand what this particular human looks like, but you don't have to describe everything to give your readers a visual. If you describe a couple things, they're going to be like, okay, I got an image in my head, thank you. And things like cats and dogs and goats and horses, you probably just have to say brown horse, and people are going to be like, okay, I got this image in my mind. Yeah, or things you've already described. If you've already described it, like I have the Sifra in my books. And when I first said the Sifra, I just said, okay, a Sifra showed up, you'd be like, what? A what? But if after my first book, you've read my first book, you become familiar with them and everything about them, and then in my second book, I say one of the Sifra showed up. You're like, okay, yeah, I know that. So if you refer to something that is imaginary or made up, after you've already totally described it, don't feel like you have to just totally describe it again. But don't be afraid to totally describe something when those things are fully from your imagination. So like the Sifra. I go into great detail in the first book when Missy, the Sifra, shows up. Talk about everything. If you want to read it, go read it. Because that's something I've totally made up. It's not something that anybody else has told me about or shown me about. And some things like werewolves or vampires or mermaids, those are more commonly known, even though they're not real and they're not like a person. If they are the general, what most people think of when they think of those, you don't necessarily have to go into great detail. Like, tell what color the mermaid's hair is, tell what color her tail is, but that's probably as far as you need to go. You don't need to be like, okay, she had a human torso and then like a fish-like tail. People know that about mermaids. So think about what people will get in their minds without you telling them and what they won't get. So back to don't be afraid to fully describe your imagined things. Like the towns in Anathalion, they're so wacky. They're not wacky, that's not a great word. They're so just like different. They're so different than our towns. And so I fully describe them as the characters walk through them and help you understand them so you get what these characters are encountering. And there's a bunch of creatures in Anathalion that are totally made up, not in any other books or mythology. They're just totally from my brain. And I fully describe those so you can get this image of what they look like. So your readers aren't lost. So that's when you should describe everything, when people have no concept of what you're talking about. But you don't have to describe everything when people do have a concept of what you're talking about. Okay, and now my last tip for how to write an explanation. Don't give long explanations unless the action is slow. For example, don't fully describe everything about this town if they're having a battle in this town while you're describing it. Don't go into full descriptions of the creatures that they're fighting if they're in the middle of fighting them. Do that at some other time. Whenever you give a long explanation, it would be best to do it at a time maybe when somebody's teaching someone, or like my characters when they're walking to a town. I keep doing this example because it's in the book I'm editing. They're walking into a town, it's evening, they're walking slow, they're just kind of looking around trying to figure out where they are, and that's the action going on at that point. So if that's the action going on at that point, that the pace is kind of slow, they're just walking, trying to figure out where they are, go ahead and describe where they are. If they meet someone and it's not like they're in the middle of something, if they meet someone and encounter someone, then go ahead and describe that person so the readers can get an image of them and then continue with the action. But if you're in the middle of an action and they just come up to fight somebody, don't be like, oh yeah, and there's somebody they fought, they looked like this and they had a sword. Just start doing the action and describe the person as you do the action. I hit their helmet, I just hit their helmet with my sword, and their visor came up, and what I'm struggling to think of examples because my child is doing things off screen that are crazy. Okay, but hopefully you know what I meant. Hopefully all that made sense. If you have any questions about any of this, or any questions about something I didn't talk about that has to do with descriptions, please do ask in the comments. Again, I'm an editor, so if you just want help, you just say, I just need help with descriptions, can I have you help me? I'm an editor, please ask if I can be your editor, and we'll talk about it. And I think that's all I want to talk about descriptions in this video. I have other editing tip videos. Oh, we're getting done. I have editing tip videos, and I will put some links in the description so you can watch those after this if you're self-editing and you want to continue self-editing. I think that's great. So please watch those too to make your story the best it can be. And thank you. Oh, like and share and subscribe and do all that stuff. And thank you for watching. Bye. Dada. That's not Dada. That's the camera. If you want to know more about Anathalion or H.A. Pruitt, please follow me on Instagram at H.A. Pruitt. You can find me on Amazon as an Amazon author, H.A. Pruitt. Please watch my YouTube channel and all my cool videos on my channel, H.A. Pruitt Anathalion. You can find me on the Facebook page, H.A. Pruitt Anathalion. You can follow me on Goodreads by the name H.A. Pruitt and the book Anathalion, or you can go to my website where so much cool stuff about Anathalion is. The website is hapruitt.com.